we're on.
Fine. Well, that, if you like, that's a sort of an umbrella coverage. But what I suggest we do, John, is think about the problems in terms of, if you like, supply input issues,
Yeah.
and then what the output side impacts of those inputs are. And then we can move on to solutions, which are really around the sort of economic and the regulatory and the technological one, of course. And then finally, we can close off and pick up some of these broader issues. So let's think about the issues as problems, if you like, on the input side, right, which we'll do now.
I think it's an excellent idea, because I think, this gives people a framework where they can think about this.
Great.
Input, output, solutions, and other issues.
Fine.
Would be excellent.
Well, in terms of inputs, I guess I identify about four big ones, really, and those are the whole issue of resource scarcity, this idea that we're on a spaceship with finite resources, both in terms of raw materials, but also atmosphere and so on, of course. The skills and the human aspects, the input that's coming from population growth, both quantitatively and qualitatively, and then finally, supply chains. I think that is, if you like, the way that we organise the supply of goods and services into our economy. So, first of all, thinking about resource scarcity, what got me going on that was the work in Wuppertal and Sweden. This idea of not having a national or even indeed a global input-output analysis in terms of monetary values, dollars, pounds and euros and so on, but thinking about input-output analysis in the economy. And as a result of the landfill tax credit scheme in the UK, we were very fortunate in Biffa, and I was lucky to be able to persuade our funding body to support, under that aegis, work on to the tune of about £10 million on 60-odd input-output analyses of different regions in the UK, different industry sectors and different products like wood and gas, methane, carbon and so on. And then we did a sort of holistic overview. And in the UK we've got 65 million people consuming about 60 to 65 million tonnes of food and non-food products as private personal individuals. This is, if you like, the weight of stuff that's sold in supermarkets. But to support every tonne that is sold at the checkout, you need, based on these studies that were undertaken by universities, trade associations and the like, we found that you need about 20 tonnes of inputs of resources. So effectively 19 tonnes of that stuff ends up as waste or as pollution, as a byproduct, and that excludes water where the ratios are considerably higher. So the first sort of message from that is that we cannot continue on the current model of production if indeed we're going to deliver consumption for these rising populations, because there simply isn't enough timber, enough growing area for corn and cereals and so on. And of course recent studies have underlined that.
It sort of fits in with your analogy or metaphor of the Earth as a spaceship in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're carrying everything with us. We can't just open the porthole and grab passing tomatoes, beans or whatever, because they're simply not there. The rest is a vacuum.
But the other thing I think is very interesting is that this data you collect could be used not only just for research, but also for monitoring on an ongoing basis, and something so extremely important.
Well, I'm still, even though I'm, if you like, I'm now a freelance individual, and I'm still campaigning on behalf of what I believe to be absolutely essential to this process, and that's the need for an online monitoring database. The Treasury, you might argue whether the current economic systems in the West are managed at the moment, but one of the reasons why the economic system is in trouble is that clearly there is insufficient monitoring of these money flows. And the same thing happens with resources. And if you don't map anything, and if you don't understand the dynamic of these flows across the system, then the chances are that your policy making and implementation is going to be suspect, whether you like it or not. So that's the first area. The second area that I'd flag up is skills, that And I guess this is involved with the whole sort of social baggage of attitudinal approaches to this problem. We have established and well advertised shortages of skills in engineering and so on. And it's, I think there's a big gap here which various universities are sort of individually tackling around the measurement and monitoring of pollution. Certainly in terms of global warming now, that seems to be, or CO2 intensity, that seems to be well covered. But there's an awful lot in terms of pollution that goes by the board. And it's a byproduct of this concept of material flow mapping. And then downstream from that, of course, we need a vast generation of skills if we adopt new technologies or new economic systems to address these challenges. The old skills simply won't do, whether that's because the technology's changed or because it requires, in the case of, say, where I trained in economics, it requires people to take a whole life costing concept, which is not traditionally something that old style economists are comfortable with. And we saw evidence of that, of course, when with the publication of various pieces of work around the discounted cash flow approaches. Sir Nicholas Stern highlighted that issue in terms of trying to cost in the impact of investing today to abate issues maybe 20, 30, 40 years out. And on the other side, we had the Lawson School, which argued that in fact you don't, that all that does is act as a brake on growth today, and you don't really arrive at the future because you're just wasting investment now. You wait until these problems emerge and then you spend to accommodate those problems, such as the flexibility of the human race. So those are skill sets, if you like, in the economics area that are just as significant as those in the technological area. The next issue is population, very unfashionable area, of course, but Sir David Attenborough has highlighted this on a number of occasions, pointing out that the mathematics of population growth at around 80 million net each year, or each week, I beg your pardon, are absolutely fundamental to this, because these quantitative drivers on consumption just mean that even though you may introduce different processes, different skill sets and different technologies to improve the resource intensity, this ratio of 20 tonnes in to 1 tonne of consumption, deliverable consumption, while you're delivering that, if your population is going up at the rate that it has been, then you just get enveloped in a rising tide of consumption that you can't chase. And the fourth impact that I think is worth drawing out here is the way that supply chains are managed. So if you look at the way that the immensely wasteful systems in food delivery chains, whether it's soft drinks, confectionery, furniture, because the environment hasn't been priced historically, it means that effectively these supply chains, for anything you care to consider in our grocery cupboard or in our houses, have been manufactured on the basis of what are so-called internal costings.
Right.
And the environment is a so-called externality, and it's free. Air is free, we don't pay for it, and therefore it never gets priced into goods until it reaches something of scarcity. So as a result, we've got immense structural rigidities in the way that stuff arrives in the system. There's a lot of fixed investment in CO2 intensive ovens, bakeries, transport networks, logistics chains, cooling, heating systems, because there's never been any need, for instance, to price in CO2 emissions. Now we are, of course, in the foothills of that process with the Kyoto Agreement, the move towards the tradable permit idea for carbon, the idea of offsets, and those are going to come in with a vengeance in the UK in 2013 with the so-called CRC programme, the Carbon Offsets Programme. But it's behind that, that's going to take decades to impact, because much of the structural physical investment and the kit, the equipment that is been bought over the last 20 years will be there for a long time as companies seek to recover their return on investment. So that's where I see the four big issue chains.
Great, Pete. That's really very helpful indeed. Very clear.